Welcome back to Bombastic Nation and Ting and Ting and Ting. Back with more vibe for you. Yes, I. And this one is called A Quick History of Germany. If you could tell, I'm kind of fascinated with that whole all those European countries there. I would love to get into all of them there at some point, but that's some crucial history there. And listen, I'm into every history, man. I'm gonna want to see some of the African history and thing like that. You know what I'm saying? Yeah, because as a kid, I read all kinds of books about this as much as I can, and now that I'm grown, looking at stuff and reading up stuff, there's stuff that I either missed, didn't know, what the vibe was. So I ain't gonna keep you all too long. We gonna go ahead and get into this. Let's YouTube and simmer. Did I tell you this is called A Quick History of Germany?
Germany is a country that probably doesn't need an introduction. The German nation has for centuries been at the heart of European politics and culture and has brought us some of Europe's most famous and influential figures like Beethoven, Nietzsche, Luther, Bach, Einstein and Wagner, but also more controversial individuals like the Nazis or Karl Marx. From fighting against the Romans to being the dominant nation within the Holy Roman Empire to unifying and becoming one of the main forces in both world wars, Germany has undisputably made a name for itself, whether you want to call it fame or infamy. Even now, Germany is one of the world's most prosperous nations, and although recent controversies surrounding multiculturalism, the European project, and record low approval ratings of Angela Merkel seem to be driving the country apart, the Germans are still some of the wealthiest people on the planet. In this video I will cover the history of Germany from the early beginnings to the modern era.
Hit me up.
We don't know much about the early history of the Germans, or any Germanic peoples for that matter. All that we know comes from the perspective of the Romans, who at the time viewed the Germans as barbaric. Also to be noted is that these Germanic peoples were in no way unified. Although their languages and customs must have been related in some way, they were separate tribes only in...
Real quick, do you see that? The Romans viewed them as barbaric. And the thing about it is, to a certain extent today people still do. Because of the Hitler thing and stuff like that. Well, for me, I just think people are people, and they have a history where certain things happen, and we shouldn't hold them accountable for that stuff, but we should make stuff now better. I ain't gonna babble on. Let's get into this.
United by a common enemy, the Romans. One such moment where different Germanic tribes united against the Roman Empire was in 9 AD, when the Cherusci, Marsi, Chatti, Bructeri, Chossi and Sicambri beat the Romans decisively at the Teutoburg forest. This resulted in the Romans halting their attempt to conquer the Germanic lands east of the Rhine River, which they refer to as Magna Germania. This created a split between the Germanic peoples west of the Rhine River and east of it. One example of this is the Germanic people west of the Rhine gradually became Christian from the reign of Constantine I onwards, whilst the Germanic people in the east remained mostly pagan until much later. In the 4th century, the Huns invaded the non-Roman part of the Germanic lands, which launched what is now known as the Migration period, where up to 750,000 people from several tribes, of which many Germanic, started invading and settling lands all over the Roman Empire. This would eventually lead to the fall of Rome in 476. One of these, the Franks, would eventually conquer most of Gaul in the west under Clovis I. Clovis was also the first Frankish leader to be baptized as a Roman Catholic rather than a Germanic pagan. From his reign onwards, Christian missionaries would travel all over the Germanic lands, attempting to convert the still largely pagan population, while the Frankish kingdom also expanded into Burgundy and Swabia. In 768, a certain somebody called Charles became the king of the Franks, and during his reign, he greatly expanded the range of the Frankish Empire. For the first time, all West Germanic people were united within one empire. This man was called Charlemagne, or Charles the Great. This empire wouldn't last for very long though. Charlemagne's grandchildren partitioned the empire into 3 parts in 843. One of these parts, East Francia, is usually considered to be the predecessor of Germany. In 936, Otto I was crowned as King of Germany, the Kingdom of Germany being a kingdom within the Holy Roman Empire, of which he would also become emperor, along with Italy, Bohemia and Burgundy, although those weren't kingdoms yet at the time. Oh, and also all of these kingdoms were made up of tribal duchies, not to be confused with the tribal duchies of much earlier. And up in the centuries following, the Holy Roman Empire would become more and more complicated, as shown on this sped up video by Ollie Bai. Yeah, I'm sorry for not animating this myself, but I think you understand why. Let's not talk about all the details of the Holy Roman Empire and its kingdoms, duchies, bishoprics, electorates and whatnot. Let's just focus on the general history of the German-speaking part of this quote-unquote empire. During the age of the Crusades, German religious orders were established, most famously of which being the Teutonic Order, which still exists to this day, although it has kind of lost its purpose after fulfilling the goal of Christianizing the Baltics. The Teutonic Knights also kickstarted the German eastward expansion, also known as Ostsiedlung. This is the name given to the medieval German settlement of areas east of the Holy Roman Empire. This created the German diaspora from Estonia in the north to Slovenia in the south, and will be used in the 20th century as a justification by the Nazis for the territorial claims in Central and Eastern Europe. Then, around 1350, the Black Death hit Europe. This plague killed an estimated 30 to 60% of Europe's population, although it was more like 20% in Germany. This was one of the most devastating pandemics in world history. Also in the Middle Ages, the Hanseatic League was established in the northern German city of Lübeck. The Hanseatic League was a business alliance of trading cities, which dominated trade in the Baltic for a full century and had its own legal system spanning from London in England to Novgorod in Russia. Something which happened during about the same time as the Hanseatic League's most successful years was the Western Schism, where the Catholic Church split temporarily in 2 and then later 3 parts because of multiple people claiming the title of Pope at the same time. In the century after this, the German Habsburg family would also see their rise to power. They already controlled most of the southeast of the Holy Roman Empire, namely the German Austria and Sudetenland, but also the Slavic Bohemia, Moravia and Slovenia. But there would also almost constantly be a Habsburg on the throne of the Holy Roman Empire from 1438 up until 1806. In 1517, Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, in which he exposed corruption in the Catholic Church. This sparked the Reformation and the Protestant Church splitting from the Catholic Church, although Luther never intended to make the church split. He simply wanted reforms. Luther also translated the Bible to German so regular people would be able to read it, all while being officially outlawed at the Diet of Worms. Also in 1524, the German Peasants' War broke out, which was partly sparked by the Reformation. At least 100,000 rebelling peasants were slaughtered by the elite. Then in 1608 the Protestant Union was formed, and 1 year later the Catholic League was also created. These two would eventually fall into civil war, which would later grow to be the 30 Years' War of the further escalation. This is a complicated war, and I would suggest you watch a video specifically focused on this one topic. But all you need to know is that it originally started as a religious civil war inside the Holy Roman Empire, but quickly escalated into becoming a continent-wide and more political than religious war. During this war, the population of the Holy Roman Empire dropped from 16 to 10 million people, with most casualties being in the German and Bohemian lands.
See, even back then they made everything political. Now stop my door. That's political. Humans are a trip.
Of the empire. It would take many years for the German people to recover. After the 30 Years' War, and also before that, the German nation had become a center of culture and science. The translation of the Bible by Luther had helped the standardization of the German language greatly, and astronomers Copernicus and Kepler became some of the most influential figures during the scientific revolution that existed in Europe during the 17th century. Then, during the 18th century, the Enlightenment started to spread around Europe, and Germany was far from unaffected by this. German writers like Christian Wolff put German on the map as the philosophic language of the modern era. Prussia became increasingly politically enlightened, and the German nation produced composers like Bach, Haydn, Mozart and Beethoven. I know Mozart is Austrian, but during the 18th century, Austria was still seen as undisputably German. During this time, the German nation was still split up into multiple parts, and Austria would only become the only one to not become part of Germany after German unification, and would only really become seen as its own nation after the fall of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Then, west of Germany, the French Revolution happened, which would eventually lead to the rise of Napoleon, who quickly tried to conquer Europe and originally succeeded in doing so, until the famous field invasion of Russia in the winter of 1812, which led to his first defeat. His second defeat being at Waterloo, after famously escaping the island of Elba and having a second go at conquering Europe. After the Congress of Vienna, the Holy Roman Empire was disbanded and the internal borders were greatly simplified. All German-speaking parts of the former empire were made part of the German Confederation, which didn't always exactly match up with country borders. For example, Prussia and Austria were both not fully inside the German Confederation, and the Confederation also owned the Limburg and Luxembourg parts of the Netherlands. During the 19th century, the population of Germany increased greatly, from 21 million to 34 million in only 50 years. This coincided with the rapid industrialization in most German states, but mostly in Prussia and its sphere of influence. This rapid industrialization would greatly help the process of unification into one German state, which would later happen. If you're interested as to why it was Prussia that unified Germany and not Austria, I would recommend this video by Brain for Breakfast. Then, a national uprising in 1848 and even more of a rise in nationalism in the 2 decades following would lead to the formation of a federal state called the North German Confederation under the leadership of Prussia. This federal state was a result of Prussia winning the Austro-Prussian War, where the Austrians, along with their mostly South German allies, fought against the Prussians, along with their mostly North German allies. Then, a couple of years later, the North German Confederation went to war with France. On the side of the North German Confederation also fought the last 3 of the 4 last remaining independent German states, Baden, Bavaria and Württemberg. This war put all Germans except for Austria against a common enemy, which would lead to the formation of the German Reich on the 18th of January in 1871 in the recently conquered Palace of Versailles in France. After signing the peace deal with the French, they also annexed Alsace-Lotharingen. Germany then industrialized even faster. They became the leader in steel production and the rural area became very urbanized very quickly. They also had a naval race for Britain over who would be the world leader on the sea. They also acquired some colonies and hosted the Berlin Conference, which started the scramble for Africa.
See, back then it was Russia against Germany against this person, Germany against that person for world domination. See, like superpowers, they just come and they go. Some stay relatively superpowered, while others just sort of fade into the canals of history, I guess you could say.
Then World War I happened. They had allied themselves with Austria-Hungary some years earlier and joined the war on their side after Austria-Hungary kinda started it. The invasion of France didn't go as smoothly as the 4 decades prior though. The German troops were halted by the French divisions and Belgian resistance, quickly leading the war into a bloody trench warfare. At the same time, the Eastern Front was much more successful. This big loss on the Russian side partly led to the Russian Revolution, which resulted in the Bolsheviks taking power in Russia and them signing a peace deal with the Germans. This made it possible for the Germans to focus all their attention on the Western Front. But because of logistic problems and a sudden reinforcement because of the United States joining the war, the Germans still lost and the Treaty of Versailles was written. This treaty was horrendous for Germany. They had to give up much of their territory to France, Belgium, Denmark, Lithuania and Poland, and also pay huge sums of money to the allies, most notably the French. They also had huge restrictions on how big the army was allowed to be. Germany became a republic and was absolutely devastated by the peace terms dictated to them by the French. This, combined with hyperinflation and a great economic depression, was a perfect recipe for political unrest. Something both the communists and fascists really wanted to use to get to power. Turns out, the fascists managed to win just slightly more souls. We all know what happened during World War II. After 12 years of Nazi rule and millions of deaths all around the globe because of war and genocide, Germany was absolutely devastated for the second time. Its beautiful cities in ruin, its population greatly reduced, and no one having any idea what the future would hold. Some people wanted to remove the German nation from the face of the earth completely in a Holocaust-like way. Others wanted it to be partitioned into many small parts again, so it could never become as powerful again. In reality, it did partition, just not into many parts. Only 4, actually. A Soviet, American, British and French sphere of influence, which would later become the German Democratic Republic and the Federal Republic of Germany, also known as East and West Germany. While East Germany went from being a fascist dictatorship to becoming a communist dictatorship, West Germany enjoyed great growth and growing freedom in the years from 1945 onwards. The economy started booming and Germany became one of the most prosperous nations in the world. This is known as the Wirtschaftswunder, or in English, economic miracle. Skipping over some Cold War history, Germany became unified again in 1990, coinciding with the end of communism and the Cold War. Then, in 2005, Merkel became the Chancellor of Germany and has been in that position ever since. She is now often seen as the de facto leader of the European Union and is often credited with all the blame caused by the disaster that is the European migrant crisis. Germany is now in an important moment in its history. More people are standing up for the national identity and turning against Merkel and the mass immigration that has made Germans minorities in their major cities. A counter-movement is on the rise and Merkel is seeing record low approval ratings. This is especially important because Germany is at the heart of the European project, and if a Eurosceptic party rises to power in Germany, the entire project is at risk, which is either a fantastic or a terrible thing depending on your views on the EU. Only the future will tell what is about to happen to Germany and whether they want to keep their national identity or continue to become an increasingly multicultural country without an identity of its own.
See, I don't think you could stop multiculturalism. You just can't. We travel too much. I mean, it's kind of like when the conquistadors came to this part of the world. You know what I mean? Some of the natives fought back and stuff like that, but multiculturalism is going to happen. It's just a natural progression of things, as I could tell. You know what I mean? Uh, Even if it's going to break it down from tribe to tribe, fighting for territory, and one tribe taking over each other, just in Africa or even here for Native Americans, there's going to be some multiculturalism happening there, And this is going to sound really cliche, but you can't stop people from loving each other. You just can't, because it's more powerful than hate on an individual basis, I think. But that's my opinion, you know what I mean? I'm entitled to, and yeah, that's just an opinion. It's not a fact per se. But anyway, thank you all for listening. That was interesting. Can you imagine learning all of that in school? That's a lot of things to learn. I wonder which parts they teach and which parts they leave out. You know what I mean? Because the treaty of this and the war of this, and that's a lot of things to learn. In my little country, we don't have that much to learn. There's a lot, but man, this stuff go back to like 4 something AD. It's a long time. You know what I mean? Uh, but in a certain way, they were really good at registering history. You know what I mean? So, but then that's a lot of stuff to learn. But it's quite intriguing. Not because of the wars and stuff, but I would like to find stuff to see how the people sort of lived in it. That's my next thing. The history of just the people, the plebeians as they call them. See how they lived and go through that. And maybe we could learn something about what's happening to us in modern times, because all around the world, poor people are getting scrunched, just like they did back in the day, which once again, history is repeating itself. But anyway, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for watching. I'll put a link in the description to this video. Go check it out. As you could tell, they have a whole bunch of other stuff there that you all could check out and take. But in the meantime, keep watching my thing there. You know what I mean? Keep checking it out. Check out the playlists and stuff on with all the educational stuff. And I also have funny stuff on there. Just check them out. Keep watching. And, take care of each other. Cool runnings.